Begin today by admitting that I may have picked a poor sermon title. If I had picked the title of this sermon, "Do You Wear a Mask?" any time before 2020, it probably would have carried a very different connotation. So I'm just going to begin by stating the sermon has nothing to do with COVID regulations. I want to talk about a very different kind of mask, a mask that we can all be tempted to wear, a mask that we may know that we're wearing it, but others may not notice. But before we do, and before we explore a particular passage from the Sermon on the Mount today, I want us to consider the mentality we have in our society today, because this will help us have a greater appreciation for what is going on in this passage. It is common for parents in our day and age to encourage their children to be free and independent thinkers. It is very common for parents today to encourage their children to take the road less traveled, indicating that most people may walk a particular path, but there may be more of a reward from doing something that fewer people will choose to do. It seems that very often in our films and in our books, the protagonist is different from everyone else. He chooses to do things in a different way, and often the story and the plot is progressed in a more positive way because of it. And I think there is a quote from one of Shakespeare's plays, Hamlet, that fully encompasses the attitude many people have in our nation. In the play of Hamlet, there is a character named Polonius. And in one scene, he's giving advice to his son, and he ends with this statement: "This, above all else, to thine own self be true." And whether we realize that or not, that is how many people live their lives. But in spite of the fact that we are a society that is very individualistic, that prioritizes the individual over the group, we still are tempted to care what other people think, and maybe prioritize it more than we should. And if we find that a difficult thing not to do today, it was probably 10 times more difficult for people who lived in the time of Jesus. They did not have a society that focused on free thinking or the ideas of an individual or how one person may choose to live their life. They were more concerned with what everyone else thought, what the community thought, what the group thought, and they prioritized that over what individuals thought. Jesus also lived in a society that experts would call an honor-shame society, where right actions and a right lifestyle helped you incur honor for you and your family, and wrong actions helped you incur shame that would not only pass to you, but sometimes even to your children. And this was very important to them. You see, they believed, and in the way they lived their lives, that if they didn't have enough honor, it would affect who they would marry and who they did business with. For example, if you didn't have as much honor as another family, well, maybe your children couldn't marry their children, or your children couldn't do business with their children, or you couldn't fellowship or associate with certain people. And so what many people in the time of Jesus, what they did is they found a way to game the system. Since everyone was very religious, they figured if they could elevate their own righteousness and could get other people to see how spiritually minded they were, they could be thought of as someone honorable and someone approved of by others. And that's what Jesus deals with here. You see, in the first century, it was thought that to be a good Jew, you had to master many aspects of your life, but 3 of the main ones was prayer, the giving of alms, or giving to the poor, and fasting. And what Jesus deals with is people who took these acts of righteousness and manipulated them for their own benefit. And that's what we're going to explore today. We're going to briefly look at each scenario and then talk about, in more in depth, the principles that we can still apply for us today. So let's look at Matthew chapter 6, and if you'll turn with me there. Matthew chapter 6, and let's read verses 1 through 4 together. "Beware of practicing your righteousness before men, to be noticed by them. Otherwise you have no reward with your Father who is in heaven. So when you give to the poor, do not sound a trumpet before, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be honored by them. I say to you, they have their reward in full. But when you give to the poor, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Jesus begins in verse 1 by establishing two principles that he's going to build on through the rest of the passage. One, be careful as to what we do in front of others and why, and to be concerned as to who we receive our reward from. In verses 2 through 4, he deals with the idea of being generous in our giving. Now, when it came to giving to the poor, this was not just something that was emphasized in Judea and Galilee. It was emphasized by Jews all throughout the world. Josephus said that because of the generosity of the Jews, every Greek in every city saw it and was inspired and was motivated to be generous by it. So this is something they were very good at. And we also have to keep in mind that charity was so important in their day and age because there was no formal charities that we have today. There was no welfare. In fact, the opportunity to even eat for someone who was disabled or even for a widow was completely dependent very often on how generous you were as an individual. And as Jesus pointed out, money could be given on the streets to an individual, or it could be collected in the synagogue. And what unfortunately many people were doing is they were taking this time to gather attention. Obviously, they weren't being so subtle about it. Jesus says they were practically blowing a horn to call attention to themselves. Now, we don't have a record of anyone literally doing that, but they were giving in such a way to call attention to themselves. But Jesus says, if you do this, you will have no reward from God. And this is an idea he brings up several times, and we're going to explore that a little bit later in the sermon. Let's look at verses 5 through 8. Verses 5 through 8. When you pray, you are not to be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on the street corners, so that they may be seen by men. Truly I say to you, they have the reward in full. But when you go into your inner room, close your door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you are praying, do not use meaningless repetition as the Gentiles do, for they suppose that they will be heard for their many words. So do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Jesus now deals with prayer. Now, for us today, that might not seem like a way to incur honor or respect for yourself, but it was a little different in the time of Jesus. You see, when a person or a man becomes a Christian today, very soon after, we encourage him to participate in worship service and to pray during the Lord's Supper, or to pray as we open up worship or as we close. In Jesus' time, it was something a little bit more exclusive. In the synagogue, they only wanted certain men to pray, men who they thought were spiritually mature, who were qualified, who were, I guess you could say, extra qualified to lead the congregation in prayer. Now, Jesus didn't say this was a bad thing, but what he said is that there were those who took advantage of it. There were those who, instead of using their prayers to glorify God, they saw it as an opportunity to elevate themselves in the community. Now, he calls these individuals hypocrites. Now, what is a hypocrite? Well, originally what a hypocrite was an actor. Someone who put on a play, someone who gave a performance. Very often this was accompanied by people wearing a mask, indicating they were playing a different part. Now, of course, when we watch movies and when we go see a play, that doesn't bother us because we know that the person on stage or on screen is purposely pretending to be something they're not. And it's okay because we're in on it and we're just there to enjoy the show. But unfortunately, many people of the day of Jesus, and also in our day, they played a part all the time whenever they were in public. And they acted as though that's who they truly were. They wanted everyone to think they were a person that actually cared what God thought about them, but really they were simply concerned with what man thought. Well, what about praying on the street corner? Well, we know from Acts chapter 3, verse 1, there were hours of prayer where people in the community were encouraged to take that time and set aside and pray to God. We see in that context, John and Peter are going to the temple because that was the time to pray. What some commentators have suggested is that if you knew the hour of prayer, you could position yourself in the most public place, maybe the marketplace, maybe a place where everyone is at. And, as soon as your timer goes off, you could be like, oh, well, it's time to pray. And you just start praying where the most people can see you. And you have to ask yourself, as Jesus points out, can't God hear your prayers just as well in a private room instead of a public place? But as Jesus points out, they have their own reward. They simply want to be seen by men, and that is all they will receive. Now, in this context, he takes a brief moment to deal with a different point. Most of the issues he is dealing with here are Jewish issues and a mindset some of the people in his community had. But he decides to talk about the Gentiles in their vain repetitions. Now, very often, Gentiles would pray with magical incantations and spells. And the idea was that if they repeated these phrases, they could manipulate their gods to do what they wanted. Now, of course, I don't think any of the Jews prayed this way, at least I hope not. But they had the mindset that their gods were not going to help them. And their gods certainly would not help them. But Jesus didn't want the people he was listening to have that mindset. He wanted to know, as he points out in verse 8, that you don't have to twist God's arm. You don't have to use flowery words or repetition to make God do what you want. He already knows what you need. And as we'll see later in the sermon, he is more than willing to help you with your needs. Now, Jesus then, in verses 16 through 18, he deals with the issue of fasting. If you'll turn with me there, verses 16 through 18. Whenever you fast, do not put on a gloomy face as the hypocrites do, for they neglect their appearance so that they will be noticed by men when they are fasting. Truly I say to you, they have their reward in full. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that your fasting will not be noticed by men, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Now, it was common in the time of Jesus for Jews, especially the Pharisees, to fast twice a week. Now, normally when we think of fasting, we simply think of going without food for a period of time and dedicating that time and attention to God. We do know in the Old Testament it was often accompanied by physical factors. For example, a person might put ash or dust in their hair. They might change their clothes, and it would indicate to everyone else that they were fasting. How much of that was actually carried over into the first century, I don't know. But Jesus does indicate that they were at least doing one thing in particular to telegraph to everyone else that they were fasting, that they were dedicating that time and that energy to God. They practically let themselves go. They let themselves look miserable because they wanted everyone to know how much they were giving up for God. Again, they're more concerned as to the approval they're going to get from everyone else versus God. And because of this, Jesus again says they will not receive a reward from God. Now, even though many of the scenarios given here were used in the time of Jesus to bolster one's reputation and honor, when we look at these scenarios, we might not see how many of them can be applied today to boost our own reputation the same way. But the principles that Jesus is giving here are just as valid today, because the same problems with hypocrisy that he had are the same problems we have today. For example, several years ago, I remember I was driving around and I was flipping through the radio station and I listened to the local evangelical station. And I never knew what I was going to listen to. Some of the guys were really off track. Some of the guys only had a few issues. But I remember I came across this one speaker, and he was one of the most elegant and articulate public speakers I have ever heard. And his name was Ravi Zacharias. And he was a man that was able to handle very difficult questions such as the existence of God, why God would allow evil and suffering. And I have to say, I was inspired by him. And he did motivate me to grow and learn. Even though I did disagree with him on several important points, there were still aspects of him that I thought I could learn from and be encouraged by. Very often what he would do is he would travel all over the world, especially at different universities, and his events would be recorded and placed on the radio or on YouTube. And I would always try to time and make sure when I was in the car so that when he was on the radio, I could listen to him. But last year, May 19th, 2020, he passed away, and many mourned his loss. In reference to his passing, the vice president at the time, Mike Pence, said that God had given us the greatest apologist of the century. However, shortly after his death, there were many reports that came out concerning him and sexual abuse. In fact, in December of last year, his very own organization did their own investigation, and they concluded that many, if not the majority, of these reports were true. On one particular event, he said this: "Those of you who have seen me in public have no idea what I am like in private. God does. And I encourage you today to make that commitment and say, I'm going to be the man in private who will receive the divine accolade, 'Well done, thou good and faithful servant.'" You know, nothing confuses me more how a person can be one thing in public and a completely different thing in private. But it has always been a problem. And, you know, I don't think any of us are as bad as him. At least I hope not. But we too can be tempted to create our own persona in public, a facade that doesn't actually represent who we are or what we want, only to elevate our own status. And if we're not careful, we can fall into similar traps. Certainly, he did. Now, I think we should always ask ourselves, why do we do the good things that we do? Why do we live the Christian lifestyle that we do? Is it to be favored among our peers? Is it to keep up appearances? Or is it to be thought of as exceptional or special or spiritually mature? One may ask, well, how can we be guilty of doing the same things that the people of Jesus did in his day? Well, you know, as we already pointed out, when it comes to fasting and maybe when it comes to public prayer, maybe those are not things that bolster our reputation today, but there are still many things that we can do that might tempt us to create a mask that we wear that doesn't really represent who we are. For example, charitable deeds is still something that people use to prop up their reputation. I remember the last secular job that I had, I worked for a company who did some work for a local healthcare facility. And we did it for free. You know, it's supposed to be charitable, but we weren't going to charge them for it. However, what the company wanted in exchange was a little video clip that they could put in a commercial that talked about how helpful we were and how much we did everything for free and how great we were. And for me, that just never sat right. It seemed that the good deed was good enough in and of itself, that, you know, they benefited from it and God saw it, and that's all that mattered. But this is something that many companies do. I see a lot of ads on the internet. I see a lot of commercials where companies will talk about how much they give to charity and how much of their products go to charity. And, you know, maybe they're just trying to encourage other people to do the same thing, but I can't help but ask, why would you bring up your good deeds? Isn't the fact that God sees that, isn't that enough? But we can be tempted, I mean, it's not just companies that have this issue, we can have this issue as well. And I think perhaps one of the greatest ways in which we can be tempted is in reference to social media. Now, social media is a wonderful thing, and the church has benefited greatly from it and utilizing it for evangelism. I know I have, I know many of you have as well. But when it comes to social media, it's very easy to create a profile that doesn't truly represent who you are. I know one thing that many of us do is when it comes to social media, we only put the good things about our lives on there. We sometimes give the impression that we have our lives all together, even though that's not really the case. And even though our profile is a vague shadow of who we really are, for many people from the outside looking in, it seems that that is who we really are. And if we're not careful, we can use social media to fall into the same traps the hypocrites did in the time of Jesus. I've seen throughout the years people from time to time, they'll take pictures or take videos of themselves giving to charity or helping a homeless person or helping a veteran. And I can't help but ask myself, why would you do that and post that? It's a good thing you did it, but why does everyone else need to know? We should also be careful how we talk about ourselves with other people. I've from time to time run into people who seem to never run out of stories about themselves and stories that make them seem intelligent or exceptional. And on the rare occasions they do run out, they tell the same stories over and over, and they assume that I don't remember. Now, I'm not saying you can't talk about yourself or maybe the achievements you've had, but we should always ask ourselves, why am I bringing this up? Why am I telling others about this? Am I trying to elevate myself? Do I care more about what they think versus what God thinks of me? Also, when we choose to do good for the world, when and why do we choose to do good? Is it only at times when others see us? Or do we do just as much good in private? Jesus talked about the idea of not letting our right hand know what our left hand is doing. Now, thankfully, he's being hyperbolic. I don't know how I would blindfold this hand and get away with it. But there's the idea that when we're doing good, very often there's a way to do it in such a way to where few people have to know, and you can only receive approval from God. In reference to charitable gifts, if there's someone who is suffering or falling behind on their rent or needs groceries, you can put that in an envelope or some groceries in a box, knock on their door, and walk away. And no one has to see that but God. When it comes to praying in public places, like I said, that's not typically a way we elevate ourselves today, although I suppose some could. We should always remember that prayer works just as much when we're by ourselves as when we're in public. And when it comes to dedicating some time or a service to God, and maybe it's something that's hard and difficult, do others really have to see it? Or can we just be satisfied with the fact that God sees it and approves of it? The idea is that when we have an opportunity to do good, we should always ask ourselves, whose reward are we concerned about? Now, we've talked about the idea of reward all throughout the sermon, but what does it mean when Jesus mentions this idea of a reward we receive from God? Well, perhaps it encompasses a lot of things. Maybe it has to do with the rewards we receive in the next life. Maybe it has to do with some of the rewards we receive in this life. Maybe it has to do with blessings or answered prayer, but there's always a contrast in this passage between what people think of us versus what God thinks of us. And so for me, it seems to indicate that the primary reward is his approval. Now, one may say, well, that doesn't sound like a lot, but to me, that's everything. After all, if God stands for you and endorses what you do and stands beside and gives his stamp of approval, what could be more important than that? After all, Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 24, that when it comes to humanity, we're like the grass of the field, and our glory is like a flower, that blooms and is beautiful for a moment, but then it quickly withers and fades away. And as James also points out in his epistle, we are here but for a vapor. We're here for a short period of time, and half the time we're here, we're stumbling our way through. We really don't know what we're doing. So when we're concerned about what others think about us, isn't it more important to consider what God thinks, who knows everything? And after all, he's the one we're planning to spend eternity with. We're here for just a moment. Half the time we don't even know what we're doing. And in light of that, we should always ask ourselves, what does God think of us? What does he think of our life and our deeds? Is he well pleased? Is he the person we're trying to honor in our actions? And if you're reflecting on your life tonight or this morning, maybe you see that you have built your life around making other people happy and receiving honor from other people instead of God. And if that's the case, we'd love to pray for you and give you this and pray on your behalf so that we can ask God to help you to do better. But if you're here today and you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and you're willing to repent of your sins and put Christ on in baptism, we'd also like to help you with that. If there's anything we can do for you today spiritually, please come forward as we stand and sing.